Welcome to A Little Too Quiet, the Ferndale Library podcast, brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. My name is Jeff Milo, and I am going to be joined in a minute here by Ophelia Crane, who is an author born and raised in Detroit and has written several books. One of which was a collection of short stories titled 3 a.m., which dabbled in one of my favorite genres, the horror genre, but she's also dabbled in the fantasy genre as well. Her latest book is kind of returning to horror with a little bit of fantasy, but is also very much grounded in reality as well. And that is a book titled I Hope Your Abuser Dies, which is admittedly a blunt title, which we do get into, but it explores the myth of Medusa. Our protagonist's name is Lyra Kitten. It is the name of one of the biggest porn stars in the world, and she has success, she has fame, she has respect, she's writing a book, and she's going on a talk show, and she seems strong, she seems to have it all together, but that doesn't protect her from the inevitable trappings of fame, but it especially does not insulate her from her abusive ex-husband, who is coming around playing mind games with her and really just kind of freezes her up as soon as he is within her vicinity whatsoever. And he's aware of this power that he has on her. But as the book goes along, Lyra meets someone and comes into possession of some, let's say, interesting jewelry, and she suddenly finds herself changing into a creature of legend. And suddenly, with her vengeance at hand, she has to face the monster within and still hold on to her humanity. So we are going to be talking a lot about these toxic and sometimes seriously dangerous relationships that we can have with abusive people in our lives. We are going to be talking a little bit about the porn industry, but this is, again, a work of fiction, and it is a work of, again, a bit of horror and fantasy, and it does get into the mythology around the Gorgon, the Medusa, the famous character with snakes for hair who can turn people into stone. Ophelia Crane and I go way back. She used to work here at the Ferndale Library, and so you'll hear us catching up at the beginning of the interview. Here's our chat. Ophelia Crane, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to see you.
It is really good to see you too, Jeff. This is awesome.
Yeah, I mean, podcast listeners should know that we go way back, and I have been a reader of yours for many years, and now a fan of yours, and now I'm looking forward to the impending release of I Hope Your Abuser Dies, your latest, it's out this week. What's the date again?
Halloween.
Oh, right. What a great release date.
Yeah. I actually decided that at the last. But no, with how everything kind of happened, in terms of the writing and all of the personal stuff and life and whatever, it really just kind of made sense. If I'm going to release this year, it's got to be on Halloween.
Yep.
It's the best time to release a scary book, I think.
Let's talk about Medusa.
Let's talk about it. Let's do that.
Yeah, but let's also talk about your protagonist, Lyra. And before we get into Medusa, which I would be more than happy to talk about, but tell me about, basic author question, where this story came from. I think something I've always admired about your writing is that it has, I wish I could be a little more eloquent here, but it just has such a rawness to it and a realness to it. Your protagonists are not like Lifetime movie protagonists. They don't own bookshops, or they're not working for a magazine. They're our protagonist is a porn star. So start there and tell us where this story came from.
This story actually started a few years ago. I was still in school, and I needed a few extra credits. And in all the years I had been in school, the one elective class I wanted to take that was never available was Greek mythology. And for whatever reason, that year it was available. So I'm like, yay. And in that class, I learned about the alternate history of Medusa, in that, we all know the story. Medusa's a monster, Theseus, and all that. As it happens, a Roman poet, I think it was Ovid, wrote an alternate history where Medusa is actually the protagonist of the story, and she's actually the victim. And she is tragically and horribly assaulted. And the goddess Athena turns her into Medusa. The debate has always been why, as a punishment for being assaulted or as protection. So, of course, ding, ding. Things start going in my brain, and I had to do a bit of research for this one because I am not a part of that world at all. But as a writer over the years, you get to know different types of people from all types, from all walks of life. So weirdly enough, I have a friend in the industry, and a lot of his and his wife's experiences really kind of opened my mind to a lot that goes on in the world, a lot that goes on in the sex industry and all of that. So it was a lot to implement and all that. It became this whole mix of things that I just wanted to express, and this story and this character, and yeah.
As I said, you're not going to get a Lifetime movie protagonist here, and I think that the pornography industry or sex workers, I think that a lot of folks who are reading fiction might have their guard up about that because there's such a stigma. There's such a stigma to that, But I also hope I'm not being naive in thinking that it just feels like there is a possibly greater chance for bad faith actors to be in that industry. Possible bad intentions, bad intentions, and the potential for all of that manipulation, abuse, etc.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that in writing this,
yeah,
and in my research, because I wanted to approach this from I don't know if positive is the right word. Yeah, I guess a positive angle. And in my research and in hearing real stories about the industry, it made me realize a couple of things. Lyra in particular is not a monolith. Okay, nor is any other sex worker. Their experiences are all individual.
Sure.
And when creating her character, I did not want her to be, I didn't want her to be the stereotypical good guy. I didn't want the reader to necessarily root for her, because there are a lot of ugly parts of the industry, and she participates in a lot of the ugly parts of it.
You don't want to create the Julia Roberts Pretty Woman situation.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Like it can be an ugly business, but then at the same time, like I said, I have known people that have had terrible experiences, but at the same time, I've known people that have had good experiences. So it really got me to thinking. Okay, so I'm not trying to make this girl a poster child. Okay, I'm just trying to tell her story, her experiences, and what she goes through, and it's a really unique story. Like Lyra's whole thing is really, really unique.
Absolutely. She's empowered. She's famous. She's got a book coming out. She's on talk shows, but she's she's a strong woman, and she speaks her mind, and she pushes back, and she's got a bite to her.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like a lot of her character, I really felt like I wanted her to be, I don't want to say the exception. I don't. I wanted her to be just entirely unique.
Yeah.
She is like the stereotype, particularly for Black women in the industry, is that they don't like, there's just all these awful stereotypes about Black women in the sex industry. And I wanted her to be someone who's kind of above all that, that kind of separated from all that. And how does a person who's separated from all of the negativity and the stereotypes and all of that move through the world? Weirdly enough, the examples that kept popping in my head was the phenomenon of Linda Lovelace and Jenna Jameson, who at their times, when Linda Lovelace's movie came out, like in the 70s, everyone was watching this thing. Mm-hmm. It was an X-rated movie, for crying out loud. Same was kind of true for Jenna Jameson. Everyone was watching, like they were these poster childs for an industry that everyone's kind of ashamed of. Mm-hmm. And I kind of wanted to put Lyra in that space, Lyra in that space. I kind of wanted to put her there because I wanted to know how someone moves through the world in an industry that is considered taboo, and then and be a normal celebrity, whatever that means, you know.
Right. When we meet Lyra, as I said, she's getting into a talk show, but she's also divorced from Page One, and then her ex is basically the villain of the book. Let's talk about that before we get into the Medusa portions. As I said, she is a really strong woman, but this relationship is kind of this poison in her mind and her heart, and she has to overcome that, which she does in extraordinary ways. But let's talk about that, and it inspires the title in a way too. So
yeah, I think it's interesting that like Lyra's whole thing with Damon is she's strong in all of these ways in her life. You know, she is independent, she's intelligent, she's strong, she's all these ways. And then there's this stain in her life.
Right.
You know, her past, like in her past, she existed as submissive and lesser and second, the shadow to Damon, her ex-husband. So it's like, yeah, she's away from that, but because he's still around and because he's still in the same industry, like all of that trauma is still kind of there, right. You know. One of my favorite scenes to write, spoilers. One of my favorite scenes to write was, I think his first appearance when she's on a date and he comes into the restaurant and he kind of throws his weight around.
Head games.
And yeah, playing head games with her, and how like a minute before he shows up, she was, flirty, and she was she was like in her whole thing and everything. And then he shows up and it all kind of shuts down. Mm-hmm. She becomes the background, right. She's not real. She's standing up to him, but not really. Like it's kind of on her date to kind of stand up to him and whatever. And I really like the psychology of that, because I think as women, especially Black women, we're supposed to forget the trauma. Mm-hmm. We're supposed to kind of, replace it with this front of being strong and whatever. But it's still there. It's still there.
Yeah.
And it affects so many of Lyra's decisions,
She's on her way up towards success, but there is this thing that is just tripping her up. Let's bring it into the Medusa territory, which part of the story is that Lyra eventually finds herself changing, and she attains power, so to speak, in which she can potentially use for vengeance. And let's talk about that, because this brings us into Medusa, because you're correct, it was Ovid, and how there's this. It's fascinating to look at Medusa, and so many people perceive her as kind of one of the original supervillains, and a female supervillain to boot. But you come at it at this questioning and simultaneously sympathetic angle. But without getting too much into spoilers, but tell us about this inspiration to give Lyra this specific power.
Of all the powers, right?
Yeah.
Lyra's like, well, okay.
let's say she meets someone who is it Athena that she's kind of a stand-in for? Anyway, I'll let you tell the story.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So she, towards the beginning of the book, she runs into someone who is like also on the talk show that she's going to be on. And the woman is, a TV psychic and, whatever, and blah, 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 blah. And she doesn't think too much of her, but the woman like talks to her and says, oh, I'm a fan, and blah, blah, blah. And so, it's the first exchange is very, let's do lunch, kiss, kiss on the cheek type stuff.
Yeah. You're not even sure. You're not even sure if that character will come back, and yet she does. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So, later in the story, she sends her a piece of jewelry, and Lyra finds that she's compelled to wear it. And very slowly over time, as things happen, while an important event happens that kind of triggers the entire thing, where well, I can talk about the event. It's in the back of the book. So she ends up being assaulted by her ex, and that event triggers her transformation. And it's slow over time. It's little things. It's how she looks. It's maybe even little tiny tweaks to her personality. It's teeny tiny little things along the way that she kind of, at first doesn't really pay too much attention to. That was also fun because there's points where other characters are remarking about her appearance, like, "Oh wow, you look great today. What are you doing with your hair?" But then scary things start happening. She starts growing scales, for one thing. And she goes to doctors and they don't know what's wrong with her and what have you. But the pivotal moment comes when it seems that she has, that she's killed. One of the characters, gosh, I feel like I shouldn't reveal who it is. But it's kind of important. It happens early.
You don't have to. Although I'll take you in this direction. I don't know if I'm gonna stick this landing, but what we know of Medusa is that Medusa can turn whoever looks upon her into stone, or whoever she looks upon. And I don't know if there was a connection there, but I felt like there was a connection that I intuited as a reader is when your abuser, and when I say your, I mean whoever in your life, whatever reader who, may or may not have had these experiences or these negative people in their lives. When that person does come around, just as Damon does in the opening scene and starts again playing head games, there may be this uncontrollable physical response where you do freeze up and it almost feels like you turn to stone.
Yeah. God, you're so perceptive, Jeff.
So why not inflict that upon, as your vengeance, inflict that upon your abuser?
Yeah. I didn't think you were going to get that. I didn't think anyone was going to get that.
Oh, yeah. Heck yeah. I think that's the coolest part of the book. Yeah.
Yeah, because you see it early. That's how she is with Damon, where she just kind of freezes up. Mm-hmm. And it is a reflection of her reaction to his abuse, which it kind of is kind of a reverse. Oh, I can't talk. It kind of is a kind of reverse mirror situation, where her trauma kind of becomes, the victims, as it were. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I can't think of too many things worse than being turned to stone.
Right.
Especially not expecting it,
Right. And again, horror has been your genre, or if not, sometimes your adjacent genre. And I think there's something horrifying about, first of all, there's something horrifying about the actual real world experience of having a Damon in your life. But then there's the fantastical horror of turning someone to stone. So they're both in this book.
It's the dichotomy between who's the monster here.
Right, exactly. Exactly. And that's something that I want to know if you were very keen to play with, because I think there is, what this book does a great job of is avoiding kind of the conventional trope of a revenge story. I think there's, I don't know how many books there have been, but there's certainly been plenty of movies where it feels like a revenge movie. And this doesn't feel like that way, because I think that is because Lyra is such a unique and complicated character. There is that question.
Yeah.
And again with like the redemption of Medusa, talk about, is this a curse? Is this a blessing?
That's interesting. I think that part is up to interpretation.
Yeah,
I do. The woman that gives her the curse, or blessing, Margaret. Yeah, Margaret. It's a blessing. And she even says so. But for Lyra, this is the interesting thing, because she is, once she realized what's happening, now she has to kind of live with this as a human being, and it's like she has to accept the fact that she is, in fact, turning into a monster, that she has become a monster. And I like to entertain the idea that the very gray area, that it's not, it doesn't have to be a horrible thing, because there are elements to what she's become that benefit her,
right?
And benefit the industry that she's in. But at the end of the day, you can't forget the fact that she is a monster now. So it's interesting because you can kind of play with that whole idea. Like, is she good? Is she evil? Is there something in between? It's I really love characters that are not static in that way.
Right.
I love dynamic characters. I love characters where you may not like them all the time. As a reader, you may not like Lyra at all. Okay.
Again,
but that's cool.
Yeah.
That's totally cool, because even if you don't like her, it makes you think, and it makes you want to talk about it, and it makes you want to explore this a little further, because I feel like as human beings, we don't do that. We want our microwave solutions. We want it in 60 seconds or less. We want everything black and white. We want everything on a plate, and it's just not that simple.
Well, this book opens again with that talk show sequence where, again, Lyra comes off as very strong, and then we get to that date, and then you realize that she isn't invincible. And I think that in and of itself is a way to generate empathy for her.
Yeah.
And you realize that there are, in some ways, she probably has her guard up very often, and probably has to. And it comes down to this thing, like, do you choose to continue to go down the path? Do you choose to continue to hold on to that necklace and risk becoming a monster? I don't know. It's crazy.
And that's the other thing too about this whole thing. As a child, I would read stories where you had characters like this that would become monsters, and then they would meet terrible ends, or they would die at the end. It's the whole Frankenstein thing for me, Probably in terms of that theme, my biggest influence other than Frankenstein would probably be Stephen King's Carrie, because he created a girl who you're sympathetic for.
Right.
And even he said initially he didn't like her because he felt like she was a victim. But she, in effect, becomes something terrible. Okay. And no matter how much we root for her, no matter how much we feel for her, at the end of the day, she is a monster. And I always felt like, I don't think, oh gosh, how do I even say this? Okay. I always felt like in horror, becoming a monster does not necessarily have to negate a death sentence. I think that it's important when it does. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it never should happen. But I think every now and then, becoming a monster is just that. You become a monster. And it's up to the character what they do with that information.
Right.
Lyra could have done a lot of things. Okay. She could have done a lot of things upon realizing that she was a monster. And the path that she takes is one where she decides essentially, she decides her own fate. She decides who she's going to be as this monster. And I think that is so important.
We get into where we are inching close, but not too close, but a little close to psychopathic territory, because then that gets into what has the character rationalized in their head. And obviously the famous slashers of horror films have rationalized something that may not make sense to literally anyone but them. I don't want to spoil it, but I love how this story ends, because it's super provocative, and it kind of leaves you at a point where you just kind of want more. But with Lyra, as with Carrie, as with Frankenstein, you ask, well, what made them a monster, and who made them a monster, and who is the real monster then?
Yeah.
From that exchange.
Oh yeah. There's that, and oh gosh, you hit nail right in the head.
Yeah.
The line between with being a psychopath. It's interesting how, and I've always said this, that we're all kind of one bad day away from skirting that line.
We're getting into Batman Joker territory. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, I feel like that experience, especially for this character, is an important one to explore.
Yeah.
Because it's a part of the human experience.
Right.
You know? It's a part of the human experience that we're not trying to talk about.
Right.
Lyra really is, Lyra, like in a lot of weird ways, Lyra is like one of my favorite characters to write because of that complication. Because then you start asking yourself, where did the line appear? Right. You know what I mean? Where did it really start? Was this always there inside of her? You know, did something have to happen to bring it out? Was this always her to begin with? I had a beta reader actually kind of ask me that question. Mm-hmm. Okay. Like where, like she just didn't understand what the line was. Where is the line then for her psychosis? And it's like, that's up for you to decide, you know, it's up for you to explore and decide. And I feel like her character is just so full of like the most human character I think I have ever written because of that. Because there are no black and whites with her. They just aren't.
Yeah. I think that's what also makes this a triumph, is that some of the things I've been describing, folks might think, oh, this is fantastical horror, but there is a lot of humanity in the book.
Oh yeah. And for me, the best horror has a great deal of humanity in it. I mean, it's why we love zombie movies, you know, not for the monsters, you know. You know, it really is the humanity. It's how we hold that up to ourselves, you know.
Again, though, the title doesn't sugarcoat it, and really, there's no way to ignore or forget clearly where the real horror is and who the real monster is. It's right there in the title. Oh
yeah.
And to just ponder like how sick that is. How dare we fellow humans even ever inflict this upon another human? That's the inhumanity there. So
the title, I love the title. It kind of fell in my lap actually. But the title, the reason why I chose it was that it was a funny story behind the title. There is a sex worker I follow on my TikTok, as the kids say, the TikTok.
Yep.
And the question was asked, do you have a t-shirt that is controversial but not political? And she pops over the t-shirt that says, in like glittery letters, I hope your views are nice. I thought, oh my God. Light bulb, that is the title of this book.
Heck yes.
Because it's not even so much that it gets your attention and it's punchy. It's the fact that it's that sentiment of you were hurt and I hope that person gets hurt too or whatever. It's that sentiment of that I think that in polite society we are not allowed to have. Mm-hmm. We are just not allowed to have that sentiment. You know, we are, as good people, supposed to, you know, be, not say such things. And while I do agree with that on some level, I feel like it's how you feel is how you feel. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's okay. Yeah. If you feel angry about that, then that's perfectly okay. And it's perfectly human to feel that way.
And you have created perfectly human characters. Folks, get past the fact that she's a porn star. These are humans. Yeah.
That was really important to me too, that they be seen as people. Mm-hmm. You know, especially like her friends as well.
Beck.
And how different they are from her. You know, like they're on a lower tier than she is as far as fame. But how they even relate to their jobs is totally different. How they relate to her best friend, Becky, is very coarse and very just, you know, what have you. And then our other friend, Terry, is very, very kind of fun loving. Okay, it's kind of, I'm having fun in the industry or whatever. And yeah, it's like I said earlier, no one in any group is a monolith. So I really wanted to kind of make that clear with these characters. That these people, they're doing this industry, they're in this industry, they have different experiences
Mm-hmm.
like any of us would,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah.
Excellent. Well, as I already started this podcast saying, I was already a fan of your horror writing, and I think you've continued to succeed. I'm really excited that this book is going to go out in the world. And we're going to have a link to opheliacrane.com. If you're listening to this podcast on the day that it premieres, the book is out. You should go order it right now. And Ophelia, it's so good to see you again as always, and I really appreciate getting a chance to talk to you. I always love talking to you about the horror genre in general too. It's always a pleasure.
Oh God, yeah. It's great. It's been great to see you. This has been a great interview, Jeff.
Cheers. That was my chat with author Ophelia Crane. We'll have a link to her website, opheliacrane.com, where you can find more information about I Hope Your Abuser Dies, her latest book, which came out on Halloween. There's also, as I mentioned, 3 a.m., but 2 other books, Moral Compass and The Pride Sacrifice. Thanks for listening to another episode of A Little Too Quiet. It is the Ferndale Library podcast, and it's brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. If you want to support this podcast, you can go to ferndalefriends.org, but please remember to rate, review, and subscribe, and maybe tell a friend. If you liked this episode, share it to social media. We'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.